It was a regular morning flight. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary when I boarded. I was traveling for business, and honestly, I wasn't in the best mood. The last few weeks had been a blur of meetings, deadlines, and last-minute changes. But I figured a quick flight from New York to Miami would give me some time to catch my breath before hitting the ground running again. As I settled into my first-class seat, I could tell something wasn't right. There was a certain tension in the air, something I couldn't quite place. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the stress of the week catching up with me. Then she came over, Sandra, the flight attendant. She was brisk and efficient, her movements almost robotic. She checked my seat belt, asked if I needed anything to drink, but there was a coldness to her approach, a subtle undertone that I didn't pick up on right away. It wasn't until later, after takeoff, that the tension turned into something far more uncomfortable. She came back to check on the passengers, and that's when I felt her eyes linger on me a bit too long. I ignored it, trying to focus on the report I was reviewing for an upcoming meeting. But then it happened. She approached my seat again, this time with a slightly different demeanor. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid you're in the wrong seat." I frowned, glancing around the cabin. "No, I don't think so. I was upgraded to first class." She paused, almost like she was waiting for me to challenge her. "You're not supposed to be in this seat, sir. You'll need to move." I was taken aback. "I've been assigned this seat. Check your records." She didn't move. "You'll need to move, please. This seat is reserved." A few of the other passengers turned their heads, sensing the growing tension. I wasn't one to escalate things unnecessarily, but I wasn't going to be moved for no reason either. I stood my ground, but Sandra didn't seem to be backing down. It felt like she was intentionally making a scene. I tried to remain calm, but the more she pressed, the more I felt something wasn't quite right. Something in the way she was behaving, it was like she was targeting me. At this point, I could feel the eyes of everyone around me. The tension in the cabin was palpable, like a quiet storm just waiting to explode. I glanced around, some passengers looked uncomfortable, while others seemed almost eager to see how this would unfold. Sandra was still standing there, unmoving, staring at me like I was some sort of problem she needed to fix. I decided to remain calm and asked her again, "Can you check my seat assignment? I'm sure this is my seat." She hesitated for a second but then shook her head dismissively. "Sir, I don't have time for this. I need you to leave the seat now." I felt my patience beginning to wear thin. I've traveled enough to know that sometimes things go wrong, but this felt different. She was insisting on something that wasn't true, and it was like she had already decided that I didn't belong there, regardless of the facts. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice level but firm. "I'm not moving until you verify with the captain or whoever else you need to. This is my seat." Sandra seemed to grow agitated, her face tightening with frustration. She walked away, muttering under her breath. I tried to go back to my report, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why was she so determined to make this a big issue? A few minutes later, Sandra came back, this time with two other flight attendants in tow, both men. They stood in a line, blocking the aisle. One of them, a tall guy with a stern face, gave me a look that seemed to say, "This is going to be a problem." "We need to ask you to move," he said in a deep voice, his tone much colder than it had been before. "We can't have you occupying this seat." I glanced at the other passengers, some of them were trying to look away, while others stared directly at the scene, clearly uncomfortable. There was something off about this entire situation. Why were they making such a big deal over a seat? "I've already told you, this is my seat," I said, standing up now, trying to meet their eyes. "And I'm not going anywhere." The flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances. Sandra's expression had shifted from annoyance to something darker, like she was trying to make an example out of me. "All right, sir," the tall flight attendant said, finally stepping back. "We'll call the captain." The flight attendants dispersed, but the tension didn't go away. If anything, it seemed to hang in the air thicker than ever. I could feel every set of eyes on me, like I was a target. A few passengers were trying to avoid looking at the scene unfolding, but their glances kept drifting in my direction. Minutes felt like hours. My heart was beating faster now, and I wasn't sure if it was because of the situation or just the sheer awkwardness of what was happening. I couldn't understand why this was escalating so quickly, why Sandra seemed so fixated on me, like I was some sort of threat. The intercom crackled overhead, and a calm, professional voice came through. "We apologize for the inconvenience, but we ask all passengers to remain seated while we resolve an issue. Thank you for your understanding." I didn't need to look around to know that the flight attendants were likely talking to the captain now. I tried to focus on my breathing, trying to keep my cool. I wasn't going to let this woman intimidate me. After what felt like an eternity, Sandra and the other two flight attendants returned to my seat. But this time, they weren't alone. The captain, a middle-aged man with a sharp, clean-cut appearance, was right behind them, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked down at me, his eyes scanning me with an intensity that made me feel like I was being judged. "Is there a problem here, sir?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an edge that made it clear he expected a quick resolution. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, there's a problem. I've been assigned this seat, and I'm being asked to move for no reason. I've already told your crew this." The captain raised an eyebrow, glancing briefly at Sandra, who was standing off to the side, her arms crossed, watching me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "We've checked your seat assignment," the captain said slowly, as if testing the waters. "And it appears there was a mistake. This seat was supposed to be occupied by someone else." I felt a knot twist in my stomach. "Mistake?" I asked, my voice edging into disbelief. "Are you telling me I've been in the wrong seat the whole time?" The captain nodded, but there was no apology in his demeanor, just a cold, businesslike air that felt completely dismissive. "I'll move, but I want a full explanation," I said, trying to stay composed. Before anyone could respond, the flight attendant named Sandra spoke up, her voice sharper than before. "It's just better this way. We can't have you in this seat." That's when it hit me. There was more to this than just a mix-up over seating. They weren't just trying to correct a mistake. It felt personal. I stood there, still in shock at how quickly things had escalated. Sandra's words hung in the air, and I could sense a shift, something more than just a seating mix-up. She had a look in her eyes, like she was determined to make me feel small, and the captain's detached attitude didn't help. The other flight attendants had stepped back slightly, but their watchful eyes remained on me, scanning my every move. I felt like I was under a microscope, as though everything I did, every word I spoke, would be scrutinized. "Look, I don't know what your problem is," I said, my patience running thin. "But I've been sitting here for over an hour without a single issue. If there was a mix-up, then fine, but this doesn't feel right." The captain shifted his weight, but Sandra's sharp voice cut through the tension again. "It's not about a mix-up. It's about the rules. You're making this harder than it has to be." Her tone made me feel like I was the one at fault here, like I was somehow the one causing a disruption, even though all I was doing was sitting in a seat I'd been assigned. The captain's voice was cold. "Sandra's right. We need to keep things moving smoothly on this flight. Now, if you could please move to the back, we'll get you settled there." I was stunned. The back? Why was I being treated like this? I had been upgraded to first class, and now they were telling me to move. I refused to believe this was just a simple seating issue anymore. I could feel the other passengers' eyes on me, some even whispering to one another. It was becoming unbearable. I knew I needed to get to the bottom of this, to understand why I was being targeted. This wasn't just about a seat. There was something more to it, and it was becoming clear that they were determined to make me the problem. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice firmer now. "This is my seat. If there's a bigger issue, then let's talk about it. But I won't be treated like I'm the one causing trouble here. Sandra's face twisted in a sneer. Fine, she said. If you won't move, we'll have to call for security. I froze. Security? Was this really happening? The thought of being escorted off the plane, publicly humiliated in front of all these passengers, made my blood run cold. But I wasn't going to back down. Not like this. I'm not leaving this seat without a valid reason, I said, my voice trembling only slightly now. And I want to speak to someone in charge. I've had enough of this. The words "call security" echoed in my head, the reality of the situation beginning to settle in. My hands clenched into fists as I stared down Sandra, trying to keep my composure despite the burning sensation of injustice welling up inside me. She wasn't just trying to move me, she was pushing me, challenging me at every turn. It wasn't about a seating mix-up anymore, it was about control. And for some reason, she'd chosen me to target. The captain stood silently by, watching the exchange like it was some routine procedure. His lack of empathy only fueled the fire inside me. Did they think they could just intimidate me into submission? Was I supposed to back down like a coward? Sandra stepped away from my seat, her expression now a mix of satisfaction and something darker, almost vindictive. She walked toward the back of the plane, speaking in hushed tones to one of the other flight attendants. My blood boiled. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't about to let it happen. I turned my attention to the captain, standing as tall as I could. If you think I'm going to let this go, you're mistaken, I said, my voice steady but firm. You're in charge here, but don't think for a second I'm just going to sit quietly while your crew harasses me. The captain didn't even blink. He simply nodded, his face impassive. You'll be asked to leave the plane if you don't cooperate. My heart raced, but I wasn't backing down. So, you're saying that because I won't let your crew walk all over me, I'll be kicked off this flight? His cold eyes met mine. We have to maintain order. I didn't care anymore. This isn't order. This is you allowing one person to abuse their power, and I'm not going to let it happen. Before he could respond, Sandra returned with 2 security personnel, both of whom were dressed in plain clothes. The tension in the air thickened as they approached, their eyes scanning me, sizing me up as if I were the problem. They didn't even look at the flight attendants, no questions, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. They simply focused on me. Sir, we need you to come with us, one of the security guards said in a monotone voice, his hand outstretched, as if he had already decided the outcome of this situation. I could feel the eyes of every passenger on me, their gazes sharp, some with pity, others with judgment. This was it. They had successfully cornered me, trying to force me into submission. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I stood up, my chest rising and falling with the weight of what was happening. The flight attendants were watching, no longer hiding their satisfaction. Sandra's cold smile told me everything I needed to know. She had won this round, but she didn't know what I was capable of. I'm not leaving, I said again, louder this time, my voice carrying through the cabin. I've done nothing wrong. You can't kick me off this plane without a real reason. The security guard's expression hardened, but I could tell they were hesitant. They weren't prepared for this kind of resistance. They weren't prepared for me to stand my ground. The moment stretched on in agonizing silence. The security guards exchanged a brief glance, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. I could see it in their eyes, this wasn't the routine confrontation they were used to. They had expected me to fold, to be intimidated by the idea of being escorted off the plane. But I wasn't backing down. Sandra, standing at the back of the cabin, was watching intently, her expression one of calculated triumph. She had expected this to be easy. But there was something in the air now, a shift. The other passengers were no longer whispering among themselves, they were watching me, waiting to see what would happen next. One of the security guards stepped forward, trying to take a more authoritative tone. Sir, this situation is escalating unnecessarily. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. I took a step back, my body tense but my mind clear. The only thing that's escalating is your behavior. You're throwing me off a flight for no reason other than your crew's mistake, and now you're trying to force me into submission because I'm standing up for myself. The second security guard, younger and less confident, glanced at his partner, who motioned him to stay back. The older guard gave me a hard look, like he was trying to size me up. I don't think you fully understand the consequences of not cooperating, the older guard warned, his voice more threatening now. If you don't leave your seat, we'll have no choice but to involve the authorities when we land. That was when it hit me. They were willing to escalate this just to cover their own backs. They didn't care about the truth, only about saving face. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. You don't get to decide what happens next, I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm not leaving unless you give me a real reason. The captain, still standing silently off to the side, stepped forward now, his face tight. He hadn't spoken in minutes, but his gaze was cold, unwavering. Sir, this is your last warning, the captain said, his voice firm but lacking any real authority. We will not tolerate disruptions on this flight. If you do not comply, you will be escorted off the plane, and we will have no choice but to report this incident to the proper authorities. The finality in his voice struck a nerve. I could feel the anger building up inside me, but I refused to let it control me. They were trying to provoke me, to push me into a corner where I'd snap. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I'm not leaving without an explanation, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the air like a knife. But if you want to keep this up, fine. I'll make sure this goes all the way. I'll make sure everyone knows what really happened here. And that's when it happened, the tipping point. From the back of the plane, a voice called out, clear and strong. I think the man's right. I turned to see an older woman standing up from her seat. She was tall, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed. She wasn't just speaking up for me, she was speaking up for what was right. Excuse me. Sandra's voice was cold, dismissive. I said I think he's right, the woman repeated, her voice unwavering. I've been watching this unfold, and it's wrong. He was assigned that seat, and you've been harassing him for no reason. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted again. This time, it wasn't just me standing alone. There was a ripple of murmurs, a quiet wave of support from other passengers who had been silently watching but hadn't spoken up. Sandra faltered, her previously confident stance shaking. The older woman walked toward the front, her eyes locked on Sandra. I've traveled long enough to know when something's off. And this is off. For a moment, Sandra said nothing. Her expression was unreadable, but I could tell the balance had tipped. The crowd was beginning to turn, and now the flight attendants were the ones under pressure. For a long, tense moment, no one said anything. The cabin was eerily quiet, the weight of the older woman's words hanging in the air like a challenge to the crew. Sandra stood there, her jaw clenched, visibly fuming but not willing to escalate any further in front of so many passengers. The captain, clearly frustrated with the way things had been spiraling out of control, shot a quick glance at Sandra before addressing the crowd. Please, everyone, remain calm. We are trying to resolve this situation without further incident. But his words lacked the authority they once had. They felt rehearsed, as though he knew the moment was slipping away from him, and he was grasping for anything to reassert control. The older woman, still standing near the front of the cabin, turned to face me. Sir, you're absolutely right. I've been traveling for years, and I've never seen anything like this. You deserve to be treated with respect, and I hope the crew here can understand that. Her support was a turning point. The murmurs of approval spread quickly throughout the cabin, as more passengers began to speak up, voicing their agreement with her. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a surge of hope. I wasn't alone in this. Others were seeing what I was seeing. They were witnessing the same unfairness, the same treatment. And they were willing to stand with me. The younger security guard shifted uncomfortably, looking to his older colleague for guidance. The older guard, however, seemed to be reassessing the situation, his posture now more defensive, almost uncertain. They were caught in the middle, caught between their duty to enforce order and the undeniable truth that what was happening was wrong. Sandra's gaze flicked from the older woman to me, then to the captain, who still hadn't said anything further. It was as though she had lost all the power she'd held moments ago. The room had shifted, and she was no longer the one in control. "I'm done," Sandra finally said, her voice tight. She turned on her heel and walked down the aisle without another word, leaving the captain and the security guards to handle the mess she had created. The captain looked at me, his face impassive but his voice now slightly more apologetic. "I apologize for the misunderstanding, sir. Please, return to your seat. There is no reason for further action." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a long look at him, considering the situation. "I'll return to my seat," I said, finally, "but I expect a formal apology. And I expect you to deal with your crew properly. What happened today is unacceptable." The captain nodded, though his expression was hard to read. "Of course, sir. We will take the necessary steps." I didn't believe him. Not entirely. But at that moment, I didn't care. I had made my stand, and I had won. The passengers were on my side. The crew had backed down. It wasn't about winning an argument, it was about standing up for what was right. As I sat back down in my seat, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Something had shifted today. And it wasn't just about the seat. It was about power, control, and the way we treat one another. The flight may have been headed to Miami, but for me, this was the real journey, the one that would stay with me long after I landed. The older woman gave me a nod of approval as she walked past, her eyes filled with understanding. In that moment, it wasn't just about her standing up for me, it was about us standing up for each other. The rest of the flight passed in a strange, uneasy silence, but the damage had been done. The crew no longer had control, and I knew that when we landed, they would have to answer for everything that had happened. And I would make sure they did. When the plane finally touched down in Miami, the tension that had gripped the cabin for the past hour didn't simply vanish. As the wheels hit the runway and the seatbelt signs turned off, there was an uncomfortable quiet that lingered. Passengers were gathering their things, but no one spoke much. Some exchanged glances, others kept their heads down, all of them silently processing what had happened. I was one of the first to get up, gathering my bag and preparing to leave. As I made my way down the aisle, I noticed that the crew wasn't lingering near the exit like they usually did, greeting passengers with fake smiles. No, this time they kept their distance, avoiding eye contact. They knew. As I approached the door, the captain stepped out in front of me. His posture was stiff, and his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. I stopped, meeting his gaze. "Sir, once again, I apologize for the inconvenience," he said, his voice flat. "I've spoken to the crew about the situation, and we will be addressing it with them. It will not happen again." I raised an eyebrow, trying to gauge the sincerity in his words. "I don't need an apology," I said, my voice steady. "I needed respect, and I didn't get that today. I'm sure the crew learned a lesson. I hope it wasn't a lesson they had to learn at my expense." The captain nodded, his face tight, but he didn't argue. He knew. He knew that this wasn't just about a seat, it was about the way they treated me, the way they assumed they could control the situation without consequences. "Thank you for your understanding," he muttered before stepping aside to allow me to exit. As I walked off the plane, I felt the weight of the ordeal slowly start to lift, but I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. I could feel the ripple of what had happened beginning to spread. I wasn't going to let this slide quietly. I had been humiliated in front of a plane full of strangers, treated like I was the one in the wrong when all I had done was take a seat I was assigned. The moment I reached the terminal, I pulled out my phone and began typing. The story was going to be told, every detail, every moment of injustice, every single person who had failed to do their job. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about holding people accountable for their actions. By the time I got to baggage claim, the email was sent to the airline's corporate office. I wasn't waiting for a token apology. I wasn't going to let this brush under the rug. I demanded a full investigation. As the days passed, I kept following up, contacting people higher up the chain. And eventually, I got the response I was hoping for, a formal apology, yes, but more importantly, a reassessment of the crew's behavior, and a commitment to training on how to treat all passengers with dignity and respect. The crew involved had been let go. It was the outcome I had wanted, but it didn't feel like a victory. It wasn't a win because someone had lost their job. It was a win because the system had been forced to acknowledge its flaws, forced to recognize the impact of one person standing up for what was right. And as I walked out of the airport that day, I knew something had changed within me. I had stood up for myself when no one else would. And in doing so, I had not only held the airline accountable, I had reminded everyone on that flight, including myself, that no one should ever be made to feel less than because of a mistake or the abuse of power. The world is full of people who try to push others down, to take control in ways that aren't fair or right. But sometimes, it only takes one person to stand up, to push back, to change everything. And that day, I was that person.